The old woman's eyes, clouded with a lifetime of hardship, watched as her granddaughter, Elara, was led away. A lump of fear and despair tightened in Elara's throat, a bitter taste on her tongue, as she realized the finality of her fate. She was being married off to a man she barely knew, a man whispered to be as poor as their own parched land, a desperate sacrifice to save her family from starvation. Yet, as the simple ceremony began, a chilling sense of dread washed over her, not for what she was losing, but for what she might be unknowingly gaining. Elara had known nothing but the sun-baked earth and the relentless struggle for survival in her small, forgotten village. Every sunrise brought the same ache in her bones, the same gnawing hunger that had become a constant companion. Her family, a cluster of tired faces etched with worry, depended on her. So when the proposal came, a cold, unyielding offer from a distant relative in a neighboring, equally impoverished village, it felt less like a choice and more like a cruel decree. The man, Thomas, was described as quiet, hard-working, but utterly devoid of prospects, a mirror image of their own bleak existence. It was a transaction, a life traded for a few sacks of grain, a promise of a burden lifted, even if it meant her own heart would sink deeper into the dust. The journey to his village was a blur of dust and silence. Elara's grandmother, a woman whose wisdom was as deep as the lines on her face, had held her hand tight, whispering words of resilience that felt hollow against the thudding of Elara's own fear. She had always dreamt of a different life, one filled with stories and laughter, far from the clutches of poverty. But dreams, she had learned, were luxuries the poor could not afford. Thomas, when she finally met him, was indeed as described, tall, with a humble demeanor and eyes that seemed to carry an unspoken weight. There was a quiet intensity about him, a stillness that made her feel both uneasy and, oddly, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, perhaps a faint echo of respect for his own quiet acceptance of his lot. The wedding was a somber affair, a stark contrast to the vibrant celebrations she'd heard tales of. There were no joyful dances, no feasting, just a simple exchange of vows under the gaze of a few solemn villagers. Elara felt a deep sense of injustice burn within her, a silent protest against a world that demanded so much and gave so little. She was giving away her freedom, her future, for a semblance of security for her family. But what of her own security, her own hope? As Thomas's hand, rough from labor, took hers, she felt a shiver, not of affection, but of an unknown future. His touch was firm, yet surprisingly gentle. There was a moment, just a fleeting instant, where his eyes met hers, and she saw not pity, but a profound sadness, a shared understanding of their intertwined destinies. It was a fleeting connection in a world of stark desolation, a fragile thread woven into the fabric of a life she never wanted. She told herself it was just the exhaustion, the grief. But deep down, a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of curiosity began to sprout. Life in Thomas's village was a mirror of her own, perhaps even bleaker. The houses were fewer, more dilapidated, and the land, if possible, seemed even more stubborn, yielding little despite endless toil. Elara found herself falling into a familiar rhythm of labor, her days dictated by the sun and the demanding earth. She cooked the meager meals, fetched water from the distant well, and tried to make their small, sparse hut feel like a home, a futile attempt to infuse warmth into a life stripped bare. Thomas was a man of few words. He worked from dawn till dusk, his frame lean and hardened by relentless effort. He never complained, never raised his voice, a silent, unwavering presence. She often watched him, a figure silhouetted against the setting sun, and felt a strange mix of pity and frustration. He was so utterly resigned, so accepting of his lot. Was this to be her life now, a quiet echo of his own desolate existence? Yet, small things began to chip away at her initial impressions. He always ensured she had the larger portion of their meager meal, a small, unspoken gesture that spoke volumes in their world of scarcity. He would leave her the softer blanket on cold nights, even though she knew he, too, shivered. Once, she found a wild flower, a tiny splash of vibrant red, left on her crude wooden bedside table. He never mentioned it, never acknowledged it, but she knew it was from him. These were not grand gestures, not declarations of love, but quiet acts of kindness that pricked at the hardened shell around her heart. They were moments that hinted at a depth within him she hadn't anticipated, a silent compassion that softened the edges of her resentment. She still felt the profound injustice of her situation, the burning ache for the life she'd lost, but a subtle shift was occurring within her. She was no longer just his wife by force. She was slowly, reluctantly, beginning to see him as a human being, a partner in their shared struggle, even if that struggle felt insurmountable. The weight of his unspoken sadness, which she had initially mistaken for resignation, now seemed to carry a different hue, a secret burden she couldn't quite decipher. Days turned into weeks, and the monotonous routine of village life began to feel less like a prison and more like a muted existence. Elara learned to predict the subtle shifts in Thomas's moods, the slight tightening of his jaw when the crops failed, the brief moment of quiet contentment when a small harvest came in. She saw the lines of worry etched deeper into his face with each passing season, mirroring her own anxieties. Yet, despite their shared hardship, there was an invisible barrier between them. He never spoke of his past, never shared his thoughts, and she, in turn, kept her dreams and disappointments locked away. Their conversations were limited to the practicalities of survival, the weather, the dwindling food supply, the never-ending chores. One evening, a fierce storm descended upon the village, unleashing torrents of rain that turned their muddy paths into swirling rivers. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at the flimsy roofs of their huts. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped Elara. Their hut, already fragile, groaned under the onslaught. Thomas, despite his usual quietude, moved with an urgency she hadn't seen before, securing their few possessions, reinforcing the door with a sturdy plank. As a particularly violent gust ripped through the village, a section of their roof groaned ominously. Thomas immediately sprang into action, climbing onto a rickety stool, battling the wind and rain to secure the loose thatch. It was a small act of heroism in their desperate world, and watching him, a spark of admiration, fleeting but undeniable, ignited within Elara. He wasn't just a poor man. He was a steadfast presence, a quiet protector in a chaotic world. Later that night, as the storm finally abated, leaving behind a silence punctuated only by the drip of water, Thomas sat by the flickering oil lamp, meticulously mending a torn piece of canvas that served as their only window covering. His hands, usually rough from manual labor, moved with an unexpected precision, almost a delicacy. As he worked, a small, worn leather-bound book slipped from his pocket and fell to the dirt floor. Elara instinctively reached for it, a sudden, inexplicable curiosity overcoming her. Before she could pick it up, Thomas quickly snatched it, a flash of something unreadable in his eyes. Panic? Fear? A flicker of an emotion so intense it startled her. He mumbled an apology, a rare breach in his usual silence, and quickly tucked the book away, his demeanor returning to its usual guarded quietude. That small, almost imperceptible moment hung in the air between them, a silent question mark, hinting at a life, a secret, beyond the humble confines of their shared poverty. For the first time, Elara truly wondered, what was he hiding? The incident with the book gnawed at Elara. It was a small thing, yet it felt like a tiny crack in the stoic facade Thomas presented to the world. She found herself observing him more closely, noticing the subtle shifts in his behavior, the way his eyes would sometimes drift into the distance, holding a gaze that seemed to see beyond their humble village. He possessed an unusual meticulousness in their shared poverty. Even their few tools were kept in perfect order, almost too perfect for a man who seemingly had nothing. There was a quiet dignity in his movements, a sense of self-possession that contrasted sharply with the desperation that usually defined their existence. It was as if he carried a different world within him, one she couldn't access. One afternoon, a stranger rode into their village. His clothes were of fine quality, his horse well-groomed, a stark contrast to the worn fabrics and skeletal animals that were the norm here. He carried himself with an air of authority that sent ripples of unease through the villagers. He asked for Thomas by name, his voice firm and resonant. Elara watched, a knot forming in her stomach, as Thomas emerged from their hut, his face unreadable. The stranger spoke in hushed tones, but Elara caught glimpses of words. Urgent deal company. Thomas listened, his gaze unwavering, his responses brief and almost imperceptible. The stranger handed him a sealed envelope, thick and official-looking, before mounting his horse and riding away as swiftly as he had arrived, leaving behind a bewildered silence. Elara's heart pounded. Who was this man? What business could he possibly have with Thomas, a man who, by all appearances, had nothing to his name? When she dared to ask, her voice barely above a whisper, Thomas simply shook his head. Just an old acquaintance, he mumbled, his eyes avoiding hers. But the tremor in his voice, the quickness with which he tucked the envelope deep into his tattered shirt, told a different story. The casual dismissal felt forced, a thin veil over a secret too profound to share. The seed of curiosity that had sprouted earlier now began to blossom into a frantic need for answers. The kind acts, the hidden book, the stranger's visit, they coalesced into a perplexing puzzle. Her life, which she had thought was a known tragedy, now felt like a mystery wrapped in plain sight, with Thomas at its enigmatic center. The weight of the unspoken hung heavy in their small hut. Elara found herself scrutinizing every detail, every gesture Thomas made. The way he meticulously polished the small, tarnished silver locket he always wore beneath his shirt, a simple piece that seemed oddly out of place among his humble belongings. The sudden, brief absences, sometimes for a full day, where he would return exhausted, but with a strange, faraway look in his eyes, offering no explanation beyond vague mentions of village business. The villagers, too, seemed to regard him with a curious mix of respect and deference that went beyond mere neighborly relations, almost as if they knew something she didn't, or perhaps chose not to acknowledge. One sweltering afternoon, a severe drought tightened its grip on the region, threatening to decimate the already struggling crops. Despair hung in the air like a suffocating blanket. The village elder, a man whose wisdom was usually a source of comfort, announced that there was no more money, no more options. Their wells were dry, their meager savings depleted. Faces crumpled in resignation, tears flowed freely. Elara felt the familiar cold grip of hopelessness, the crushing weight of their inescapable poverty. But then, to her astonishment, Thomas stepped forward. His voice, usually so soft, resonated with an unexpected authority. "There is another way," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the astonished faces. "I will ensure our village has water. I will provide for us all." A stunned silence fell. How could he, a man who seemed to have nothing, make such a promise? Elara watched, her heart pounding, as he pulled out the sealed envelope the stranger had given him. With a quiet, almost reverent gesture, he broke the seal. Inside, it wasn't just papers but a stack of currency, crisp and new, far more than anyone in their village had ever seen. He then revealed plans for a new well, not just a simple hole, but a complex, efficient system that would draw water from deep beneath the earth, a project that required immense resources, knowledge, and, most crucially, colossal wealth. As he spoke, his eyes held a glimmer of a different man, a man of power and influence, a man who commanded respect not through force, but through sheer capacity. The villagers, their faces transforming from despair to dawning hope, looked at him with awe. Elara, however, felt a different kind of shock, a profound betrayal. The man she had married, the poor man she had resented, was a stranger, a secret billionaire right there under her very roof. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless and reeling in a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and a terrifying, unsettling sense of the unknown. The immediate aftermath was a tempest within Elara. Anger, hot and stinging, vied with a crushing sense of betrayal. How could he have lived alongside her, sharing their hunger, enduring their hardships, all while harboring such an immense secret? The quiet acts of kindness, which had once softened her heart, now felt like calculated deceptions, crumbs of comfort from a man who could have lifted them from despair with a mere whisper. She saw his humble clothes, his calloused hands, not as symbols of shared struggle, but as parts of an elaborate, cruel masquerade. The injustice she had felt about her forced marriage now magnified tenfold, tainted by the bitter taste of deceit. Yet, amidst the storm of her emotions, another, more complex feeling began to surface: confusion. Why? Why would a man of such wealth choose to live in such abject poverty, to marry a poor village girl, and endure the very hardships he could effortlessly alleviate? As Thomas began to organize the well project, his quiet efficiency undeniable, Elara watched him. She saw the genuine relief flood the faces of her fellow villagers, the hope rekindled in their eyes. He wasn't just throwing money at a problem. He was personally overseeing every detail, his knowledge of the land, of engineering, of logistics, surprisingly vast. He worked alongside the villagers, not like a benefactor, but like one of them, his hands still dirty, his brow still furrowed in concentration. Slowly, imperceptibly, the anger began to yield to a different kind of understanding. She remembered the sadness in his eyes on their wedding day, the hidden burden she had sensed. Perhaps his secret wasn't a deception meant to hurt her, but a heavy cloak he wore for reasons she couldn't yet fathom. Was it a desire for a life unburdened by the expectations of wealth? A search for something real, something rooted, away from the gilded cages of his true world? As she watched him direct the digging, his gaze steady, his resolve unwavering, Elara realized that the man she had married was indeed a puzzle, but perhaps not the villain she had initially painted him to be. The story of her life, once a tragedy of forced circumstance, had suddenly become a complex tapestry, interwoven with a mystery far greater than her own suffering. And for the first time since her forced marriage, Elara felt a flicker of something new. Not just fear or anger, but a strange, compelling curiosity about the real man behind the poor facade and the life tea.